All right, this is going to be a little bit of a nerdy video, but the thing I'm going to discuss today is the vapor Yeti. So what I mean by that is we have all these control layers, and one of the problems that we have is, in theory, vapor diffusion. I'm going to make the argument that air flow is so much more of a problem that vapor diffusion really isn't an issue, and we really overthink it. And when we build things, we're way too concerned about vapor diffusion in walls than we should be. So this is a decent article that Rockwell did, but it's not necessarily dependent on Rockwell. So here's the problem: is when we have interior vapor in the air, like just humidity in the air. It could be like, in the wintertime, you take a shower and the bathroom steams up. There's moisture in the air, and that's what these little dots indicate. So if you had a typical home with half-inch drywall, a 2x6 stud, any kind of fluffy insulation in there, it's some half-inch sheathing and then some siding. The little dots indicating moisture is going to diffuse through the wall. And then in the wintertime, this sheathing is going to be cold, and the dew point is going to be lower than the amount of moisture that the temperature can handle. So that moisture is going to theoretically accumulate here and cause water as opposed to vapor. So it's going to turn into the liquid form, which will then absorb into the materials and cause them to be wet and possibly rot, mold, etc. So the theory here is that excessive moisture is going to make it through the wall, condense, cause problems. So one of the ways to deal with that is interior vapor retarder. So this little blue line right here kind of indicates a vapor retarder, and there's a ton of different styles, to include craft-faced fiberglass insulation as a vapor retarder on the inside. But there's a bunch of smart, aka smart vapor retarders that are variable perm rating and all this stuff. Plastic could be a vapor barrier, meaning there's not going to be any moisture allowed to go through it, but that causes some other problems. So here you can see a lot of moisture. Vapor retarder slows down the amount of dots, indicating slows down the amount of moisture that moves through the wall, less chance of condensation on the sheathing. And then here is a hole in the wall where excessive amounts of moisture are going to move through and cause condensation where it otherwise wouldn't have if you had a vapor retarder. And this is really the big point I want to make, that as long as a building is airtight, this is a theory that nobody sees unless there's some outside forces like, some crazy amounts of interior moisture, or there's like solar vapor drive on the outside or some other things. But 99% of homes are not going to see a problem with vapor diffusion if it's airtight. So in other words, this is something to consider, but vapor diffusion in walls is not a problem. And I think we really overthink it. That's just my opinion. A lot of people will disagree with that, which is good. So I think it's a Yeti. I don't think it exists. I think it's something that we don't need to worry about. So here's a famous a bunch amongst our nerdy groups is vapor diffusion in a wall was tested. This is a long time ago. This was recently updated. So there's this study back in the day. They tested a 4x8 sheet of drywall over the course of a winter in different climates. And in cold climates, approximately 1/3 of a cup of water moved through a 4x8 sheet of drywall through vapor diffusion. Whereas if you had a 1-inch hole in that same period, you'd have 30 quarts of water moving through the drywall, indicating it's a 90 times the amount of water moving through the wall by airflow rather than diffusion. So if you had like a electrical outlet, had some accumulated space that was equivalent of 1 inch, you'd have 30 quarts of water through the wall condensing on the sheathing. But like I said, this has been updated, and it's actually a lot worse than this. So they found out that it's actually in maybe 200 times greater than what they thought. So depending on the climate, Atlanta, I believe they did one in Ontario, Canada. But it could be, the colder the climate, the more airflow is an issue. And the less, well, not less vapor diffusion is an issue, but the more airflow is a problem. So 200 to 250 times more moisture is going to move through a wall based on a small hole than it will through diffusion, which further indicates that air tightness is our big concern and not vapor diffusion. However, we base our building codes, our new building code, 2018 IRC. They have 21 out now, but our current area is using 2018. We have exterior insulation that is not required, but you can build walls in different ways. But basically, it's required to have exterior insulation. Then the theory here is to provide exterior insulation in order to warm the sheathing. So Zone 6 would require R20 cavity insulation. So if you had 2x6 wall with fluffy stuff, you'd have approximately R20, and then you'd have R5 on the outside. Or if you had a 2x4 wall, you'd have R13 of fluffy insulation with R10 on the outside. And the theory here is to have a total R value that's enough for our climate, but also enough exterior insulation to control condensation. And that's a great theory, except R5 isn't actually enough to control condensation on the sheathing. So according to the Department of Energy, you need approximately 50% of the R value in climate zone 6 to control moisture. So there's, this is only, 25% of the interior. So there's some debate. Sometimes people say 60-40, you can have 60 inside, 40 outside. Some people say a third. So if you had 20, you'd have 10. So a lot of people say R10 is what's required for our climate zone 6. If you had 20 fluffy, 10 exterior. But the Department of Energy's research shows that it's 50%. So, 2010 would be 50%. All right, here's a nerdy video. The Unbuild It podcast. This guy, Peter Yost, is very, very bright. I mean, they all are. Steve Basic. They're pretty smart, but watch this whole episode. It's pretty good. I'm just going to pull out a couple clips to demonstrate my point.
How much moisture moves through drywall under regular sealed conditions versus the 1-inch hole over a season?
Well, this is a little thought experiment that Joe did. And he basically said, if you pick like a Chicago climate, you take the average temperature over a 3-month period, and you look at the relative humidity difference, you would get I think it's 1 pint of water through the wall during those 3 months, making it through that 4x8 sheet of drywall. And if you cut a 1-inch hole in it, you could move 90 pints of water through that in the same time.
I remember it as an order of magnitude.
Yeah, so essentially, although that would be two orders of magnitude, 2 times 100 almost.
So in other words, air transported moisture is order of magnitude more damaging than vapor transported.
Yeah, we have.
So that's the point. Is air is so much more of a problem than diffusion. Airflow carrying moisture is so much more of a problem than diffusion that it's like diffusion really isn't even an issue. So here's another clip.
It would be about correct.
Okay. And so in that time, how many vapor damaged buildings did you investigate that had nothing to do with bulk water, that had nothing to do with starting in bulk water?
Well, an awful lot of the buildings were were bulk and or air leakage. But I think you're asking how many were diffusion related.
Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah. Not one for me.
At a company where what percentage of your work was building failure investigations?
Well, mine was not very high.
Sorry.
There was one, I don't know how you would label the cause, but what it was a development of houses for a certain group of people that I believe they were SIP paneled walls. And the issue was that because of the size of the house relative to the occupant load, which was relatively high, usually about somewhere around 5 or 6 people per like 1,200 square foot unit, that they were getting mold issues and condensation and stuff. And they did a lot of like ethnic cooking and stuff. So it was there was a lot of reasons that there were high levels of moisture in these small units.
So like I said, unless you're doing like something stupid, like putting way too many people in a house, I just don't see that it's a problem.
To make sure that we support my argument, that's all.
I agree, because I would ask that question: how many houses have we ever seen that had a true vapor problem?
And it's interesting because in order for that to happen, for it to be just related to vapor, that building would have to have a perfect air barrier, right? And that's just not what happens. I mean, you can have something that was severely aggravated by the diffusive forces because the concentration of water inside the building was so high, but you're never going to get a building where that's the only problem. It's going to have bulk water leaks and or air leaks.
I think the committee is going to admit that vapor is not a sole problem to buildings.
Joe's big exception would be unless it's an indoor swimming pool and or an ice rink. You know, they have vapor pressure differences where it can be a dominant force.
All right, so I've been thinking about this vapor diffusion thing for years, and I came across this house. This is a 26-year-old approximately house. It's a 2x6 wall, fiberglass insulation, craft-faced fiberglass insulation, CDX half-inch plywood sheathing, and then vinyl siding. But the interesting thing about this house is it has, right here, you can see half-inch polyisocyanurate foil-faced foam, which allows no moisture to move through the wall. But it also isn't enough insulation, in theory, to warm the sheathing to reduce the condensation plane. So it's not, the sheathing won't be warm enough to stop the condensation. So in theory, that wall should be soaking wet and rotten. There should be a ton of, in the wintertime, there'd be a ton of moisture inside, moving through the wall and condensing on the sheathing. But that's not what I found. All right, down in the basement here, a little cross section of the wall. There's faced fiberglass insulation, kind of just stuffed in here, you know, like typical for the 90s. And then cross section of the wall is just a standard 2x6, half-inch CDX, half-inch foam, and then a building paper wrap. This is the current condition on that house. It's a very traditional 90s wall, 2x6 wall, fiberglass insulation. It's craft faced, so it's class 1, class 2. Interior vapor retarder, half-inch drywall on the outside, on the inside, and on the outside, it's got half-inch CDX, specifically CDX over OSB, which is probably important. And then it's got a half-inch foil-faced exterior insulation. Now, half-inch insulation, this is going to be like an R3, and like I said before, the code. Like I said before, the code is going to indicate that there should be an R5, and that may be undersized. Really should be, according to the Department of Energy, should be 50%. So if this is an R19 batt, it really should be R10 out here, which indicates that there should be moisture condensation from the interior vapor in the wintertime being pushed to the exterior and condensing on this plywood, but then not having the ability to dry to the outside because of the foil-faced polyisocyanurate insulation not allowing moisture to move through it. It's a zero perm product, so the only drying potential is to the inside. So in theory, this half-inch foam isn't enough to keep the sheathing warm and stop condensation from interior vapor drive. So in theory, after 26 years, this should be all wet. And Is there a moisture meter on here? I just pulled this off. The sheathing's dry. We're on the north side of the building, and this particular section had something bolted to it, which is even worse. It's under an overhang, which is even worse. This is really a shaded area. It should be the worst case scenario on the house, and there's no moisture issues that you would think there would be with interior vapor drive coming out. All right, so again, I'm on the north side of the building. There's a valley there, so there's a ton of water that splashes down here. Just pulled this siding off. Obviously, after 26 years, this tape isn't in the greatest spot. You see there's some bugs in there. You know, there's moisture that got in there. I'll pull this off, and the sheathing is fine. It's a little bit more elevated at 15, but considering the water damage that should be here, there's up top here we're back down to 10, so there's a seam there. But you know, it kind of proves the point again that there's no interior vapor drive. I mean, even worse, we're underneath this window. There's potential leaking issues, and there's no moisture issues here. 10 or 11. So I'm still in search of the Vapor Yeti, but after searching here, I haven't located him.